Well, let's talk about this with Mark Stevens, international lawyer from Howard Kennedy and an expert in extradition. Good morning to you, Mark.
Morning.
Good morning. I suppose the first thing we should point out is that actually there won't be any extradition, will there? We know that Prince Andrew, he's got diplomatic immunity as the Queen's son. The FBI, the American authorities, they can't extradite him to the United States to answer questions. But the big issue here has been he keeps on saying, it's been front page news in recent months, he keeps saying, I'm willing to cooperate to offer any help I can to the investigation into Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And yet the FBI and the authorities in America keep saying he's refusing to cooperate. But what powers do they have to ensure that he does?
Well, they have a thing called mutual legal assistance, which is if he's a witness, they can ask him to give evidence under oath. And they've made that request to the Home Office here in the UK. But the thing that I think troubles me about this is that he has offered to answer what we in the law call interrogatories, that is, written questions with written answers on oath. And it kind of beggars belief that the American authorities wouldn't take that as a first step. It doesn't preclude them from interviewing him face to face at a later date, but at least you could get over the first part of it. And he said repeatedly he's willing to do that. And on behalf of the survivors of the abuse of Epstein, it does seem to me highly surprising that the prosecutors, in a fair and impartial search for truth, wouldn't do everything they can to capture evidence in whatever way they can.
Yeah, and that's the worry, isn't it? Like, we don't know who's telling the truth and who isn't about whether there is cooperation or not, whether Prince Andrew's lawyers are saying that they're offering, but they're not actually being taken up on that offer. If constantly there's wrangling and attempts to sort of delay and defer this. But of course, there may well be a lot of grandstanding going on by the prosecutors in America. Look, it's a very different system from the one we have here in the UK in terms of their willingness to sort of just fling accusations around, isn't it? I mean, but he is wanted as a witness, and yet he has been accused of a crime himself, a crime that he has denied. This is Virginia Roberts Jeffrey. Apologies. She has been at the centre of all this. She's been a part of all of these court cases, and that she has claimed that she was trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein and by Ghislaine Maxwell to London and around the world, but she was forced by them to have sex with Andrew. Now, she wasn't underage, whether or not he says that he didn't meet her. There's a photograph of them together. He says that he certainly didn't have sex with her. He has denied any allegation of wrongdoing. But is the fear, do you think, on behalf of Prince Andrew and his lawyers, that once he does submit to some sort of questioning, he will no longer be treated as a witness and he'll be treated as someone who is suspected of a crime?
Well, what's going on here, Julia, is an attempt to entrap and entice and indeed coerce Prince Andrew into cooperating with this investigation. They want him to go to America because they know they can't compel him to come because of the reasons of diplomatic immunity you adverted to earlier. And so actually what they're trying to do is to put the maximal pressure on him. But if I was a lawyer for Prince Andrew, I have to say I would be very skeptical about the way in which this case has been run. Mr. Barr, the prosecutor, the original prosecutor on this case, was grandstanding by going and holding a press conference outside Jeffrey Epstein's empty mansion on the Upper East Side in New York. He's broken confidentiality about communications with witnesses. And I think his lawyers are right to be skeptical that they aren't treating him like any other witness or indeed any other suspect in a case like this. They are actually giving him special treatment. And I think that is a trouble. But of course, now they've got this additional concern, which is, Ghislaine Maxwell. She's been charged, interestingly, in relation to offences in the period 1991 to 1997. That doesn't mean that she can't be charged with a later period. And of course, the allegations surrounding Prince Andrew, or the interest around Prince Andrew, who of course denies everything, is 2001. And so, if you face a life imprisonment, the question is why, if you're Ghislaine Maxwell, would you not cut a plea deal, spill the beans, turn Queen's evidence, as we would say here, become a prosecution witness, get less sentence, and then that brings a lot of people down. And there's a lot of high-profile individuals who will be sweating this morning.
Absolutely.
Perhaps
apologies, the vagaries of remote broadcasting here. The Sun, bet you're sweating now, Andy. And of course, he wanted to distance himself from Jeffrey Epstein in that Newsnight interview with Emily Maitlis late last year, which of course just actually brought the whole story far more into the public domain. Many of his claims, his explanations, really, let's be honest, not convincing at all. I was in Pizza Express at 5 o'clock in Woking, so I couldn't have been in a nightclub in London, not that many miles away. Some hours later, the idea that he couldn't have been dancing with Virginia Jeffrey at the time because, of course, he says he had post-traumatic stress disorder from the Falklands, and he was unable to sweat. All of these stories are all very bizarre, and that he went and stayed in Jeffrey Epstein's home and went for a walk with him so he could gently break off in an honourable way his friendship with this man who had already at that time been convicted of a serious crime and had served time behind bars for basically child sex trafficking. There are lots of conspiracy theories about this, though, aren't there, Mark? Particularly related to Jeffrey Epstein. Well, how he was able to serve originally. Again, a huge number of charges the police hoped to bring against him when he did actually serve time behind bars. But actually, he was allowed to do a plea bargain down to virtually no time behind bars, and effectively was. Really, he's behind bars only for a few hours a day or in a week. He basically lived a free life and was able to travel. It was an extraordinary situation. But also the fact that he supposedly took his own life in prison in August 2019. And many people, and I have to say I'm among them, think that is rather unlikely that he would do so. But we know there are a lot of people implicated in this, not just Prince Andrew, but other people, big, very powerful, famous, rich people, including the current president, Donald Trump, former president Bill Clinton, who would happily travel on his airplane, seen with him constantly visiting his home. When we hear reports, and there's been a recent Netflix documentary, very, very detailed documentary with loads of allegations from numerous young women, very credible, and from numerous former staff at their various homes, saying it was impossible not to know that this man was constantly surrounded by young teenage girls. And how could anyone not raise a question mark about that relationship he was having with those women?
Well, I think, we have to look at the facts here. The facts are that there is nobody under the age of 16 that's been implicated in this. And the age of consent, both in the Virgin Islands, where he had a home, and in New York and in New Mexico, is 16. Yeah. The difference here is that in Florida, the age of consent for consensual relations is 18. So actually, the sex charges are going to be quite difficult to bring home against these rich and powerful individuals. And so what they're trying to do, the feds, is they're trying to capture them effectively by saying that they knew and approved of Epstein's sex trafficking, or they conspired to assist him in his sex trafficking, or they moved people across borders or state lines in America for sex trafficking, which are all very serious charges in and of their own right. So that's where the evidence is going to focus. That's where the feds' focus is. And I think that's why they want to interview Prince Andrew about what he knew about the sex trafficking.
Absolutely. Do you think, just finally, Mark, that he will ever actually face questioning, whether written questions, written questions and answers, apologies, or on video, or even travel to the United States? Do you think that's ever going to happen?
I think that there's two things that will happen. I think he will answer written questions on oath. I think he can't get away from that. And secondly, I think he will probably have to have a face-to-face interview here in London. I had an interview at a London police station of a UK witness when the prosecutors from New York came over on the Weinstein case. And so, it's not an uncommon thing to do.
Front page of pretty much every single newspaper today is the arrest of Ghislaine Maxwell. Of course, she's the former girlfriend and close friend of Jeffrey Epstein, the man who was a convicted child sex trafficker himself already, but had facing huge number of charges last year. Took his own life. That was the official death. Hanged himself in prison in August 2019. Ever since then, Ghislaine Maxwell has been on the run in hiding. Well, now she has been arrested. Of course, we also know her as the daughter of disgraced media mogul Robert Maxwell. But also, she's a close friend of one Prince Andrew. All his defence about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein seemed to rest in that Newsnight interview we all saw with Emily Maitlis late last year on the fact that he wasn't Jeffrey Epstein's friend, he was Ghislaine Maxwell's friend. Well, now Ghislaine is being charged with recruiting, grooming and abusing 3 girls in the 90s, one as young as 14, for Jeffrey Epstein, and there are allegations that she took part in the abuse as well. Well, what implications are there now for Prince Andrew? As the Sun front page has it, bet you're sweating now, Andy, as the Prince feels the heat after the FBI nicks Ghislaine. Well, let's talk to Michael McParland, who's a QC, who's a barrister and US Attorney of 39 Essex Chambers. Good morning to you, Michael.
Good morning, Julia.
Good morning. Now, this obviously, lots of people are, and the headlines are certainly implying that the net is tightening around Prince Andrew. It must make very clear, though, although he has been accused of charges of claims himself by Virginia Roberts Guffrey, that she claims that she was trafficked by Maxwell and Epstein to have sex with Prince Andrew in London. He has denied having even met her, let alone having sex with her, and denied any wrongdoing. But he has been accused by the FBI, the American prosecutors, of not actually cooperating with questioning about Jeffrey Epstein and indeed Ghislaine Maxwell. His lawyers keep saying, no, he's willing to cooperate, but they haven't taken us up on it. What changes now, given that Ghislaine Maxwell is behind bars and has been actually faced not just arrest but charges? What changes for Prince Andrew now?
I think it's time for the FBI to make up their mind whether they're going to use the official treaty arrangements between Britain and the United Kingdom to ask Prince Andrew, or to ask the courts over here, to ask Prince Andrew to be deposed, to give evidence under oath within a deposition setting.
Well, the lawyers for Prince Andrew say that he has agreed to give evidence under oath. Is that not right?
Well, they say, according to the reports in the United States, they say he's been willing to give a written statement under oath, but was not willing to voluntarily sit for an interview. Now, the prosecutors in the US have been saying, well, he won't help us. And I'm afraid that's a kind of political game they're playing with this.
Well, again, a statement is very different from answering specific questions, and crucially under oath, of course, because, I mean, some of the answers that he gave, not under oath, but in that Newsnight interview with Emily Maitlis, which he obviously apparently left the interview feeling rather chipper with himself and thought he'd done a jolly good job, left rather more questions than answers, didn't it, in terms of where he was when and why he continued a relationship with a man who'd already served time in jail, as Jeffrey Epstein did, for procuring child prostitution. I don't think many of us would stay friends with someone who he claimed to be just an associate, and certainly not stay at their homes once we'd had that information. I mean, although Prince Andrew is being treated as a witness, is the fear that actually, if he did give evidence, that he could face the possibility, even though he's denied all wrongdoing, and must stress that, that he could be dragged into this, as many others may well be, depending on what Ghislaine Maxwell has to say?
Well, he insisted throughout that he's completely innocent of any allegation of misconduct or impropriety. I think the fear is, and it's a legitimate one, you don't go and voluntarily give evidence in the middle of a criminal prosecution abroad when there are distinct mechanisms in place that will protect you. Now, under that treaty, if the FBI want to question him under oath in the English courts, they can send details of the questions, what they want to question him about, to the Home Secretary, and the courts can order him to appear and answer questions in relation to those questions. But to just walk into an interview at the FBI is not something any lawyer would advise anyone to do. You may remember Donald Trump in the Mueller inquiry. His lawyers refused to allow him to be questioned by Mueller because of what they called the perjury trap. The kindest thing you can say about that is they feared that questions would be sprung on him that he didn't know, and he'd say something stupid, which the prosecutors would then use to charge them with a criminal offense. So there's a golden rule there's a criminal lawyer in Washington who sees his clients, and behind his desk is a big fish mounted on a plaque with a hook coming out of its mouth. And the motto underneath says, if I kept my mouth shut, I wouldn't be here. Now, no one volunteers for this kind of investigation. There's a distinct process the FBI should go through it and stop this sort of shadow boxing in the press.
Yeah, indeed. Well, we understand that they have actually put a formal request into the Home Office for Prince Andrew to give evidence, but he does have diplomatic immunity. He could answer questions, by video, or detectives could travel to the UK. I mean, after 14 days quarantine, it would appear at the current time. And ask him questions, but they could not extradite him to the United States under any circumstances.
There's no question of extradition. They can, under this treaty, they can ask, will this person be willing to come to the United States to give evidence? And if that person is willing, then they go there under immunity. They are immune from being charged, prosecuted, detained for the duration of their giving evidence and for 15 days afterwards. So they can ask that. But no one can order anyone, Prince Andrew or anyone else, to go to the United States to give evidence.
What do you think the likelihood of any of this happening is, though? Because the situation is actually, Prince Andrew said, the facts that we know so far are damning enough for most people. Most people would not be hanging around with somebody who had served time in jail and been accused of procuring underage girls for prostitution. Most people would have nothing to do with those people. They certainly wouldn't stay in their homes. They wouldn't be talking about their honour and having to go talk to these people personally. But also, I mean, all that's emerged have been Netflix documentaries and the like. So much details emerged about what happened in Epstein's, in his homes in New York and in Miami and his private island and the like. There's just, why would a middle-aged man have numerous young teenage girls hanging around his home? Why would that, unless you've got a teenage daughter and they're their mates, there is no business for young teenage girls to be hanging around your home unless something nefarious is going on. Do you think that actually it doesn't matter whether or not there are any charges, doesn't matter whether or not there's, Prince Andrew is ever charged with or has done anything criminally wrong, and he has denied, must stress that, any criminal activity of any sort, that actually the facts out there already are already so damning that he's not going to recover from this?
Well, Prince Andrew has said that he didn't see any of this sort of behaviour. And in the original indictment against Epstein, before he killed himself, all the charges were taking place in the descriptions of them didn't indicate that anybody else other than Epstein and a couple of women who facilitated their transit, which may be alleged to include Ghislaine Maxwell, will have seen the particular offences that took place. Now, there's not an argument that, Prince Andrew owes a moral duty to come forward and explain what he saw, but that arises in the context of where someone's saying there's a whole criminal conspiracy going on. And I think anyone would advise anybody, he denies any involvement in any conspiracy. He says he didn't see anything and didn't know anything. And he's willing to say under oath in writing what he saw. I suspect he may end up being asked or required by the English courts to give evidence under oath as to what he saw. It's not very edifying for anyone, but that's the way it's going to be, I suspect. Because
absolutely,
if anything, Ghislaine Maxwell's charges makes it impossible for him to say, well, I have no connection at all with the events that took place in Florida and New York. Not least because one of the counts against victim 3 in this indictment involves Ghislaine Maxwell grooming this minor woman in London. She meets her in London. And so that, when I read that, I thought, whoa, there's a line of inquiry they'll want to pursue there.
She's an attorney representing 6 of Jeffrey Epstein's victims, and including one who's still got misconduct claims against Ghislaine Maxwell. This, of course, after Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested and charged yesterday by the FBI. And now more calls facing Prince Andrew back here in the UK to answer the FBI's questions. Well, let's talk to Lisa Boom right now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good morning. You obviously keep very well indeed. You keep very late hours there. I know it's very early hours of the morning in LA. Very much appreciate you talking to us, Lisa. This development with Ghislaine Maxwell's arrest and charging with her basically grooming and abusing 3 girls, one as young as 14. Big question marks here. She has been regarded as being crucial in terms of a lot of the victims that you've been representing getting justice after the death of Jeffrey Epstein. Tell us about about the role that you and the various people you represent believe that the role that Ghislaine Maxwell played in Jeffrey Epstein's treatment of young women?
Well, my client says that Ghislaine Maxwell was absolutely brutal and ruthless. Even just hearing her name yesterday, my client was shaking in fear. She still has post-traumatic stress from all of the incidents of abuse that she endured at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, she says. Ghislaine is accused of recruiting and enticing so many girls and young women to come to the home of Jeffrey Epstein, girls who may not have trusted this older man who they didn't know, but they did trust a woman who at times could be very friendly and kind and earned their trust, and as a result shattered the lives of so many. Ghislaine is now accused not only of aiding and abetting Jeffrey Epstein in his crimes, but also perjuring herself, of lying under oath a couple of years ago in a civil deposition. We're very pleased to see that she's now being brought to justice.
Well, indeed, so many of the alleged victims of Jeffrey Epstein have spoken about her role in initially recruiting them and the role she played in the abuse. And her name's cropped up again and again. And although there's only involving 3 girls in this particular suit involving between 1991 and 1997, we know from previous cases brought against Jeffrey Epstein, and we know from all of the many, many victims who've come forward. I think it's more than 100 young women now, is it not? Who've come forward, and if anybody's seen that 4-part Netflix documentary about Jeffrey Epstein will see the detail. These charges being brought against her are the tip of the iceberg of the claims made against her and Jeffrey Epstein.
Well, there are some reports that Jeffrey Epstein was abusing as many as 3 girls a day. So there are probably hundreds, if not thousands, of victims. And for every victim who comes forward, there are probably so many others who are just too frightened, too scared, don't want to be involved, don't want to think about this anymore. I've talked to many of them. So the scale of this is horrifying.
It absolutely is. It's extraordinary. Well, let's talk about the implications for Prince Andrew, of course. The Sun front page in the UK today is "Bet You're Sweating Now, Andy," a reference, of course, to Prince Andrew's claim, one of his defences of the allegations that were made against him by one of the alleged victims of Jeffrey Epstein, Virginia Roberts Guthrie, where she said they'd been dancing at a nightclub in London, and he'd said, well, his argument was he wasn't there, he was at a Pizza Express in Woking, but also she'd said how he was very sweaty, and he said actually at the time he had a post-traumatic stress disorder, meant he actually couldn't sweat. So I think a lot of guffawing about that in the UK. Now he's been wanted by the FBI for questioning as a witness, but he has also faced some allegations. No charges brought against him. He's denied any wrongdoing, I must stress that, but that he did have sex with Virginia Roberts, as she then was, and that Virginia Roberts had been trafficked by Epstein and Maxwell to London for that purpose. These are very, very serious allegations that he has denied. But given the wealth of information and the number of witnesses coming forward, do you think it is likely that the FBI will be seeking to question, to attempt to extradite or question in some way Prince Andrew in a more forceful fashion than they've been doing so far?
Well, I hope so, because no one is above the law. And now that Ms. Maxwell has been arrested, this isn't just about Jeffrey Epstein, who Prince Andrew says he barely knew, he only saw a few times. But Prince Andrew himself has said that he was quite close with Ghislaine Maxwell. And so even putting aside the very serious allegations against Prince Andrew, he may have information that will be helpful to the case against Ghislaine Maxwell. He may be able to put her at a place and time where the victims say she was there and she denies being there, for example. So it is incumbent upon him to do what he said he would do and cooperate with authorities. And if not, yes, I think that the United States authorities should subpoena him, just like any other witness who may have knowledge about serious crimes, to come in and answer questions and give that information. It's very important.
Yeah, and indeed, of course, as someone who's a senior royal, a son of the Queen, he has a security detail 24/7, keeping him safe, who are independent witnesses to anything happening, and also keeping, no doubt, very strict records of where they were, when, and who was there at the time. In which case, there could be some independent corroboration. A lot of people here on this side of the Atlantic, and no doubt on your side as well, wondering why Prince Andrew hasn't volunteered a lot of that information, because because of his apparent horror at all these young women who are being abused by this man whose plane he flew and in whose home he stayed in. Most of us, I think, when we discovered that our good friend, or someone who he claimed then was an acquaintance, even though he stayed in his house. I don't know about you. I don't stay in my acquaintances' houses or go on their planes. But would you not be? You learn these stories about this person, you would be horrified and want to give all the help you possibly could. Of course, the big issue here, though, is whether or not Ghislaine Maxwell decides to do a plea bargain. She's facing the best part of 30, 40 years behind bars. Realistically, she will know an awful lot of the names of the people who may have been involved in this. We know some of the very, very famous rich men who have travelled on Jeffrey Epstein's plane and stayed with him. The likes of Donald Trump, Bill Clinton's names have been raised as people who have enjoyed his hospitality. It may well be that she might be pointing fingers in a bid to save her own skin. How dangerous do you think that may be for a number of the men who seem to have been implicated so far?
And I'm going to have to jump off after this answer, but
of course,
I think everyone should be very concerned. Absolutely. I think what this shows is that the U.S. authorities are very serious about following up with all of the enablers, and this may be just the beginning.